Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. And this is, yes, What's Left. I'm your host, Larry Erickson. This is a special edition of What's Left. I actually should have been wearing orange today for this, but it turns out I don't own anything orange. But if you know the significance of that, then you know what I'm going to be talking about for the next half hour. But let's get right into it, jump right in. February 14th, 2018, 17 killed, 17 wounded at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Broward County, Florida. May 18th, 2018, 10 killed, 13 wounded at Santa Fe High School in Santa Fe, Texas. May 25th, 2018, 2 shot, happily none killed, at Noblesville West Middle School in Noblesville, Indiana. The Noblesville incident, according to CNN, was the 23rd shooting at a school this year, 22 weeks into the year. And of course, we heard from the right wing and the gun nuts all their sorrowful expressions and their thoughts and their prayers, and of course all their excuses and diversions and distractions, blaming the massacres on mental illness, bullying, Hollywood, violent video games, socialism, single parents, godlessness, abortion, and now Ritalin, everything that is except the guns. Well, you know what? I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear anything they have to say now or ever again. I don't want to hear the gobbledygook. I don't want to hear the nonsense, the lies, the garbage. I don't want to hear any of the venom spewing from the vile snakes at the NRA. I don't want to hear the slimy excuses, the shop-worn slogans, the stale talking points. There have been well over 60 mass killings in the U.S. over the last roughly 30 years. That's one every couple of months for 30 years. And the vast majority of those cases, the guns used were purchased legally. Of the weapons used, nearly 3/4 were either assault weapons or semi-automatic handguns. So I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear anything the gun nuts have to say. I don't want to hear anything from their bought-off lackeys in Congress. I don't want to hear their lies. I won't tolerate their distractions. I will abide their trickery. I won't fall for their attempts to talk about anything except the guns. What's more, I don't want to hear from the Democrats either. I don't want to hear any of the mealy-mouthed blather from people who will whine that they're doing the best they can, even as the body count mounts and members of their own party continue to either worship at the altar of the NRA or run and hide at its approach. And that, in fact, is nothing new, nothing new. Even Mr. Nobel Peace Prize President himself, President Hopi Chinji, talked big about meaningful action on guns, but the only thing he actually did was to expand the areas where you could legally carry them. Thanks to legislation approved by and actively defended in court by the glorious Mr. O's administration, you can legally carry a gun on an Amtrak train, which you couldn't before. You can legally carry a concealed loaded gun around in a national park, which you couldn't before. And on top of this, I don't want to hear, as we always, invariably, inevitably have heard after every tragedy, and as sure as the sun rises in the morning, we will hear again after the next one, that now is not the time to talk about something about the carnage. Because if that's true, then what the hell is the time? Know this, this is important. The mass murders, the school shootings, they grab our attention, they take our breath away, they break our hearts and break through our indifference. But they are in fact only a small part of the reality, a small part of the daily grinding carnage that guns bring to our nation. Over the past 5 years, on average, about 13,000 people are murdered by gun in the U.S. every year. Over the past 5 years, on average, nearly 22,000 people have committed suicide by gun every year. That's over 35,000 gun deaths a year. That's 96 a day, including 7 children and teenagers. 96 a day. That is 3 Parklands plus 4 Santa Fe's a day, every day, day after day. The suicides, in fact, here are especially tragic because while gun suicides account for 60% of all gun deaths and 50% of all suicide deaths, they only account for about 10% of all suicide attempts. Because 90% of people who attempt suicide with a gun succeed. 90% of those who attempt suicide by a different means survive and rarely try it again. So I have to ask, when is the time to talk about the guns? How many more have to die before it's the time? How many more have to be shot down before it's the time? How many mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, wives, husbands, sons, daughters have to lie in spreading pools of their own blood before it's the time? How many children have to cry out for mommy after a fall or a bee sting until somebody has to, as gently as they can, remind them again why mommy's not there before it's the time? How many wives have to wake in the night and reach across the bed and have that moment of confusion before the pain of remembering again why there's no one there? How many parents have to suffer the repeated gaping, empty ache of being in a grocery store and reaching for something before remembering again that they don't have to buy that sort of cereal or that particular brand of peanut butter? The days of those children, those spouses, those parents are not measured in minutes by pains. They are not marked by hours, but by aches. So when is the time? And why is this time, whatever time it is, not the time? So I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear any of it. Not the time, of course it's the time. It's way past the time. Way past the time to face the truth that there is only one issue here. There are too damn many guns that are too damn easy to get. Part of the problem is we actually don't know how many people own guns and how many guns they own, because keeping official records on that is illegal. It's all by survey. But based on the surveys, there are, by various estimates, somewhere between 270 million and 310 million guns in private hands in the United States. That's nearly one firearm for every man, woman, and child in the country. And it's about half of all the weapons in civilian hands in the entire world. But while those numbers, those are survey numbers, so they're indefinite, there is one thing that's for sure. More guns equals more gun crime, more gun deaths, more gun violence, more gun murders, more gun suicides. That's what the research shows over and over again. I'm going to give you a few examples of this. In 2013, researchers from Boston University looked at the relationship between gun ownership and gun homicide rates over a 30-year period, 1981 to 2010. They covered all 50 states, and they found what they called a robust correlation between the two factors. Also in 2013, a team led by Dr. Eric Fliegler, a physician in pediatric emergency medicine at Boston Children's Hospital, used information on state laws from the Brady Center for to Prevent Gun Violence to create a list of 28 laws that states could adopt to limit access to guns or to control guns. They also used data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention regarding gun violence. Putting these data sets together, they found that the more such laws a state has, the lower the rate of gun violence in that state. The states in the top 25% of gun legislation had a 42% reduction in gun deaths as compared to those in the bottom 25%. That included a 40% drop in homicides, a 37% drop in suicides. Notably, when gun violence went down, other sorts of violence did not go up. Meaning that, if there weren't guns, people didn't just go around and kill other people by some other means. In 2014, a team led by David Hemingway, director of the Injury Control Research Center at Harvard University, assembled a list of nearly 300 experts on guns, established by going through nearly 1,200 articles that have been recently published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. Hemingway began sending monthly surveys to the authors of those articles. The surveys showed that a heavy majority of the experts agreed that having the gun in the house makes it a more dangerous place to be, makes it more likely that a woman living in the house will be killed, and increases the risk of suicide. Heavy majorities also agreed that having more guns around does not reduce crime, and strong gun laws do reduce homicide. In 2016, a report by researchers from the University of Nevada at Reno and the Harvard School of Public Health used World Health Organization data to compare gun violence and murder rates among 23 developed, or high income as they're also called, 23 developed nations, including the United States. Among the findings were that Americans are 25 times more likely to be violently killed with a gun, that is murdered, than in those 22 other nations. We are 6 times more likely to be accidentally killed with a gun, 8 times more likely to commit suicide with a gun, overall 10 times more likely to be killed by a gun than in those other countries. The study found that homicide is the second leading cause of death for Americans 15 to 24, and the third leading cause of death among those 25 to 34. Americans 15 to 24 are 49 times more likely to die from gun murder than similarly aged young people in those other developed nations. For those aged 25 to 34, the risk is 32 times higher. Despite having only half the total population of those other countries studied, the U.S. accounted for 82% of all firearm incidents. The U.S. accounted for 90% of all women, 91% of children up to age 14, and 92% of children aged 15 to 24 who were killed by guns. In 2017, a working paper by John Donahue, an economist and law professor at Stanford University, addressed the question of relating gun ownership to gun crime at a time when violent crime in the U.S. is and has been going down. He found that the introduction of so-called right-to-carry laws makes violent crime rates 13 to 15% higher and gun homicide rates 9% worse over 10 years after those laws were passed. That is, even as violent crime is dropping, it would have dropped significantly more in the absence of those laws. More guns around, more guns being carried around, more guns means more crime, means more death. And this result, by the way, was based on an analysis of 37 years worth of data comparing gun crime rates in states with and without right-to-carry laws, including how those rates changed in states that adopted right-to-carry laws during that period. Finally, for now, just last fall, evidence from a massive database maintained by the University of Washington's Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, which tracks lives lost in every country every year by every possible means, showed the U.S. a shocking outlier on gun deaths. Measured by socioeconomic status, such as, income per person, average education level, things like that, the United States ranked 9th highest among the nations of the world, but on death by gun violence, it ranked 31st highest. What that actually means, this is what that means. Of the 195 recognized nations of the world, only 8 nations had higher socioeconomic success, but 164 nations had lower gun death rates. The rate of gun death in the United States in 2016, which are the most recent figures available, that rate was 8 times higher than the rate in Canada, 27 times higher than in Denmark, 33 times higher than in Germany. But we're told that all that may be true, all that may be completely true, but it's unfortunate, it's sad, but the fact is, it's the price we pay for freedom. The freedom we are guaranteed by the Second Amendment, which is the amendment that actually guarantees our freedom. Yeah, well, that's old bull. I'm going to have to get a little legalistic on you, but it's necessary because you can be damn sure that the gun nuts are going to trot out that Second Amendment argument over and over, the argument that says, I can have my guns, the Constitution says so, yeah. So first, let's be clear on what the Second Amendment actually says. Quoting the amendment, A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, the first important Supreme Court case about the Second Amendment was Pressor V Illinois, which was decided in 1886. In it, the Supreme Court found that the Second Amendment only limits the power of Congress and the national government to control firearms, not that of the individual states, which means those states could pretty much put on whatever restrictions they felt like. That decision was affirmed in Miller v. Texas, which was decided in 1894. Now, this was before the idea of incorporation, the idea that the protections guaranteed by the Constitution also applied to the states. This is before that idea became commonplace. So those decisions aren't truly relevant to the legal situation we face today. But they do mean right away that it's the idea that always, from the very beginning, it was always we should be able to have whatever guns we want, we're able to do this, blah, blah, blah. That idea is utter nonsense. But the next big case, and this is the important one, it was United States v. Miller. This is the 1939 case, and it concerned the National Firearms Act of 1934. That act required that certain types of weapons be registered and taxed. A unanimous Supreme Court upheld the law, saying there was no conflict with the Second Amendment. The court found that, and I'm quoting the decision here, in the absence of any evidence tending to show the possession or use of a weapon of the sort that was involved in the case, to show the possession or use has some reasonable relationship to the preservation or efficiency of a well-regulated militia, we cannot say that the Second Amendment guarantees the right to keep and bear such an instrument. With obvious purpose to assure the continuation and render possible the effectiveness of such forces, the declaration and guarantee of the Second Amendment were made. It must be interpreted and applied with that end in view. Now, the syntax there is a little stilted, but the meaning is clear. For 69 years, that was precedent. For 69 years, that was what was relied on by all lower courts, frequently referred to by the Supreme Court itself. For 69 years, the legal status was that states and the federal government were within their legitimate legislative powers to regulate the sale and possession of weapons which were not related to maintaining a well-regulated militia, which in the absence of state militias, except to the effect that the National Guard can be thought of as such, pretty much meant any weapon at all. Put another way, the guarantee under the Second Amendment was not an individual right, but a collective one. It was regarded as applying to the people as a whole, not to discrete individuals. After 69 years, the narrowest majority of the Supreme Court, 5-4, decided to ignore those decades of precedent, or more properly to regard them as irrelevant. In 2008, in District of Columbia v. Heller, the court ruled for the first time that the Second Amendment does provide an individual right to own a gun. Now, to do that, they had to go through some real mental contortions. First off, they treated the reference to a militia as merely and this is the quote, prefatory. In other words, just saying it had no legal effect. It had no legal meaning. It was just a passing observation, even though there doesn't seem to be another example of such a prefatory anywhere in the Constitution. And then they broke the phrase keep and bear arms into two separate rights. It's not a right to keep and bear arms. It's a right to keep arms and a separate right to bear arms. Now, that decision only applied to federal enclaves, such as the District of Columbia. However, 2 years later, in McDonald v. Chicago, that same 5-4 majority said that the finding in Heller applied to the states as well. This is what the gun nuts now rely on. This is what they now argue. Can't have gun control, Second Amendment, Supreme Court rule, debate's over. Okay, if you're ever faced with that argument, the first thing to ask those wackos is if at any time during the 69 years that the Supreme Court said otherwise, did they or anybody else on their side say, well, debate's over, Supreme Court ruled, I guess we lost? You know, of course they didn't. You know they didn't, so don't expect us to do it now. Especially because after the break, I'm going to advance an argument that the interpretation of the Second Amendment relied on by the gun nuts and the NRA and the right-wingers on the court is wholly bogus, even beyond the majority's mental contortions. Quick break. And we're back. All right, first again, here is the text of the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Hereby, for comparison, is James Madison's original proposed text for that amendment. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, a well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security of a free country. But no person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person. Now, first note that this way, by flipping the phrases, the tying of the article to a militia is specific and unquestionable. It makes no sense to regard the reference to the militia as just a passing observation. What's more, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which is the powers of Congress, those powers include these: to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years, to provide and maintain a navy, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions, and to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States. Now, note well, under the powers of Congress, Congress can maintain a navy, but it can only raise an army, and that for only 2 years at a time. Meanwhile, it can call out the militia to suppress insurrections and repel invasions. The expectation was that the United States would not have a standing army, but one would be raised in the event of need, and that the militias would be the first line of defense against an attack. Now, despite that idea, this is something actually then Justice John Paul Stevens noted in his dissent in Heller. Despite that, there still at the time was a concern that Congress would disarm the state militias and create a national standing army, and the Second Amendment was to guarantee to the states that they could maintain their militias, which means that, yes, the Second Amendment was about a militia from the get-go, which means that the Miller decision got it right, and the Heller decision should go to hell. But there's another thing that's equally, if not more, important. The gun nuts, and in fact a lot of gun control advocates, don't actually know what the Heller and McDonald decisions actually said. In Heller, and reasserted in McDonald, the majority of the Supreme Court actually embraced the central concept of the 1939 Miller decision that the federal government and the states have the authority to regulate firearms. The court then argued that the Second Amendment applies to weapons in common use for lawful purposes. In fact, in Heller, the court said, and again I'm quoting here, the ruling should not be taken to cast doubt on long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings, or laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of weapons. The majority also said that other existing or potential prohibitions, such as banning concealed weapons or the carrying of dangerous and unusual weapons, were unaffected by the decision. So the gun nuts who claim that the Second Amendment gives them the right to have pretty much any kind of gun they want, as many as they want, anywhere they want, anytime they want, they are happily totally wrong. Heller and McDonald are far more limited than the gun nuts imagine, and in fact more limited than control advocates feared. Carrying concealed guns can be banned. Carrying guns into schools or government buildings, or for that matter on Amtrak trains or in national parks, can be banned. Assault weapons can be banned. Semi-automatic handguns can be banned. High-capacity magazines can be banned. Safety locks can be required. Dangerous and unusual ammunition, such as hollow-point bullets and armor-piercing rounds, can be banned. Michael Waldman, who was president of the Brennan Center for Justice at the NYU School of Law, has noted that even since Heller, courts have pretty consistently upheld nearly all gun rules, finding that, yes, individuals have a right to a gun, but society has the right to protect itself. And in fact, that society agrees. A survey by Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Policy and Research, published in the May issue of the American Journal of Public Health, covered 24 proposals of varying severity to limit access to guns. A majority supported 23 of those. Significantly, a majority of self-described gun owners, a majority of them approved 17 of them. And in most cases, the approval gap between gun owners and non-gun owners was in single digits. And in terms of societal right to self-protection, it's wise to recall here that gun ownership is a distinctly minority position in the United States. Based on surveys, again, the only information we have, but based on surveys, no more than about 30% of Americans own a gun, and that figure may be as low as 22%, and only 42% live in a household where anyone there owns a gun. Now, by the way, an important sidebar here, this is just for me, for my own, I have to mention this. I wouldn't have approved of all of the proposals for restrictions in that Johns Hopkins survey. Some made a history of mental illness a bar to gun ownership. And the fact is that the best and most recent research shows no reliable predictive value between and associating mental health with gun violence. Put another way, research says that people with mental illness are no more likely to be violent towards others, especially to commit mass violence, than anybody else is. We can't simply dismiss the harsh truth of mass violence with the slogan, better mental health programs. They are justified on their own account, but they will not address the issue of mass shootings. They are simply a distraction pushed by the gun lobby. The issue here is the damn guns. So stay focused. Staying focused, here's the thing, a bottom line. Based on current jurisprudence, the truth is that pretty much any kind of gun, other than basic hunting rifles, shotguns, and ordinary handguns, could be banned. And frankly, damn it, they should be. Ban them all. You want to hunt? Go with a basic rifle. Don't try to convince me you need an AR-15 to take down a deer. In fact, why don't you hunt with a bow? Or is the effort of tracking the deer to get close enough to take it down with a bow instead of dropping it from a couple of 100 yards away with your manhood too much for you? You want to target shoot? Use a pellet gun. Yeah, I know, they can be dangerous, blah, 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 but don't even try to tell me that you need a Glock to shoot holes in a paper target. Ban them all. Now, I know that's not going to happen. I know there's no chance of that in my lifetime, and probably much longer, if ever. But it's not going to stop me from saying it, and it's not going to stop me from wanting it. And as long as I am 100 times more likely to be killed by a gun here than I am in the United Kingdom, I'm going to keep on saying it and keep on wanting it. Now, I'm not usually a one-issue voter. I'm not usually a single-issue voter. But this year, on this issue, on there being too damn many guns that they're too damn easy to get, I am. So this year, this time, this issue, if you are not with me on this, I am against you. Because all I can think is that until we as Americans, until we as a people, as a culture, grow the hell up and throw away our childish fantasies that somehow we were all living on the frontier in the 1880s with the only thing between us and who knows what danger being our trusty guns, until we grow the hell up and ditch the infantile fantasies of ourselves as action movie heroes ready to leap into action to defend the defenseless and save the day, until we grow the hell up and realizing that our guns have brought us death and not deliverance. Until that time, the tens of thousands of people who die by gun every year in this country will continue to die by the tens of thousands because there are too damn many guns that are too damn easy to get. All right, that's it. That's it for this. If you like the idea of these kind of occasional special what's left reports, if you will, let us know. We may see you again. The future will tell. But for the moment, as always, I'm just going to say, all of you, peace.